The global insurance industry is more than a market.
It's a movement powered by 3 million professionals around the world.
Together, we support communities as they rebuild after disaster.
Help businesses through risk and uncertainty.
Protect individuals as they plan for brighter futures.
This impact isn't possible without people.
That's why we attract, grow, and retain the very best talent.
Because when every voice is heard,
when every person feels they belong,
we don't just build careers.
We build a better tomorrow.
Belonging builds 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 tomorrow.
Hello, or bonjour, buongiorno, hola, guten tag, dzień dobry, and hey. Welcome to today's session on the diversity of diversity, a European perspective. Very excited to be hosting this panel where we'll discuss what DEI actually means around Europe and perhaps challenge some of the preconceptions and common practices along the way. I'd love to be able to greet you in more European languages, but I'm afraid we'd quickly run out of time for anything else. This session will be in English for our global audience, but yeah, maybe English as the global default is something we can explore a little later. My name is Yusouf. I'm the DEI manager for UK and Europe here at Clydeco. My pronouns are he, him, and for anyone that needs a short audio description, I have brown skin, very short black hair and beard, I'm wearing glasses, blue shirt and a darker blue tie. This session is CPD accredited by various international bodies, so as a quick reminder, and the objectives for Dive In 2025 reflect the year-end activity of identifying effective ways to attract and retain talent, create engagement and momentum for collaboration, and develop guidelines, actions, and role modeling opportunities for an inclusive culture. I am so pleased to be joined by an esteemed panel today who have offered to share their unique experiences and professional perspectives. David Meheut is managing partner in our Paris Clydeco office with more than 20 years of experience in insurance and reinsurance law. David grew up in France, studied in the UK, and has broad connections across Europe through his colleagues and clients. Georgie WIllis is head of DEI and social impact at Eurostar. Georgie has vast experience working in multiple countries around the world, both in advisory and in-house, not least at Eurostar, which of course operates in the UK, France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. Liisa Antola is manager for DEI and customer outcomes at the Association of British Insurers, working to ensure the insurance and long-term saving sector reflects the communities it serves. Liisa grew up in a remote part of Finland and has since studied and worked internationally, including in Switzerland, Poland, and the UK. And last but certainly not least, Lionel Paolella is Professor of Social Science and Organization at the University of Cambridge Judge Business School and is an affiliated faculty at Harvard Law School, currently teaching the core DEI strategy course and DEI modules in the MBA curriculum. Lionel grew up in France and has Italian heritage and currently lives in the UK. Thank you all so much for being here. We have real diversity of thought and representation across different sectors and fields. Now, before we dive into the minds of our panelists, we'll start with a few audience poll questions just to get people warmed up. So the QR code is there on Slido and the hashtag to join. We'll have 3 quick questions, which if you load Slido and you go to the polls section, the first question is, how many official languages are recognized in the European Union? Let's see. Answers coming through. Most people saying 24. "24 is indeed correct. However, if you include some of the other languages and some of the regional dialects, we're getting close to 300 languages actually across Europe. The second question is, does your organization categorize European countries into a single Europe region for business purposes? And that's things like UK and Europe, as I described my role. EMEA, or Europe, Middle East and Africa, as some organizations call it. Pretty sure I know what most people will say on this one. 100% of the answers so far is yes. I'm sure that's something to reflect on. And the last question, which aspect of DEI do you think is most overlooked in Europe? Race and ethnicity, disability and neurodiversity, socioeconomic background, LGBTQ+, religion, age, other. This one is a lot more varied, as we can see. Socioeconomic background is coming up on top for now. Okay, lots of food for thought for our panelists as we go through the conversation today. We will use Slido for audience questions, so feel free to put questions in. We'll try and save time at the end to answer as many of those as we can. Now, I guess, David, if I may start with you, we can think about just DEI in general and from your perspective, growing up, working in Paris and France, what does DEI actually mean to you, and how has that evolved throughout your career, particularly as you sort of start working across Europe with your European clients and colleagues?
Well, thank you, Yusouf, and good afternoon, everyone. It's interesting because it's I've seen a great evolution. I've been with Client pretty much all my career. I even started before 20 years. I started in 2003 as a trainee, a little bit in France, a little bit in the UK. And I would say, and I've done my studies in the UK first and in France, and I would say that in France, when I started, especially in the legal profession, DEI was probably nowhere on the map, and largely seen as a very Anglo-Saxon thing. At least that's my perception of how it was perceived in France. And people not realizing, and I'm making generalizations here, but that's sort of perception I had on the French market. Not realizing the importance of it, the impact, and I've seen a huge evolution driven largely by the fact that we are an English firm trying to export this to other countries, and with the natural reaction of, oh, this is something coming, the natural reaction initially on the ground being, oh, well, this is something coming from the UK. This is very Anglo-Saxon. So sorry to go into the stereotypes, but it's pretty much going to be a theme, a recurring theme. To now people, something on which, with the efforts that have been carried out, is something onboarded by people here. And I've really seen it being transformed into something being, quote, imposed, unquote, by London, to something in which people do actually buy in. Maybe I'm being optimistic. There's obviously a lot of work to be done still, but I do find a lot of progress being made, and even though more can be done, there's definitely been some evolution from my experience here, and some influence brought in from across the channel.
Indeed. So I mean that's encouraging to hear. But just looking at that second question that we did on Slido, 100% of the respondents said that organizations still have a kind of Europe region as a single bucket. Now, there are business reasons for that, sure. And I guess jumping into the sort of difficult question straight away, how do you personally navigate that sort of preserving your national identity versus what we might describe as European multiculturalism?
Well, first, and that's a very personal belief, but I do believe in the European project, and the motto of the European project is united in diversity. And I think uniformity is it can be in that set. I mean, it's a wealth of history, wealth of culture in the various member states of European Union and of Europe more generally, and it's a force. It can have two effects. It can be something which bring people apart and pull them together to give the best and create the best result. What I find in this, although I really buy into the fact that I wanted to work in Paris, wanted to work for an English firm, having studied in London, and I really like this multiculturalism and the sort of values that it brings with it. I appreciate that this is not something always shared, and with time I've also come to recognize that there are certain things in my own country which are part of the culture and are nice things to promote, as long as we don't promote them in an aggressive way. What I do find is, even though you want to work in a global environment and share this sort of global values and common values, the fact of working together in a multinational team brings out and exacerbates these small national differences, and the risk being, of course, to stereotypes, and also the risk being to when you look at certain, especially when you work together in a team, a multicultural, multinational team in Europe, these small differences are exacerbated, even though, regardless of how pronounced these national characteristics are. And so you tend to also have the natural tendency, which is something you should be wary of, but of going into caricature and making generalizations. But one example, I mean, it's a caricature, but we see it time and time again in terms of the work done in advance, and working with a team with my German colleagues and the degree of preparation coming into a meeting versus the degree of improvisation of the French team. It's a generalization, but it's also, there's a bit of truth in it. And if you don't manage that in advance, it creates frustration on both sides. The French people feeling sometimes that the meeting is too decided in advance, and there's not much, and German people feeling that their French counterparts are not prepared well enough. And sorry for making generalizations straight away. I don't think it's the right thing, but it's also integrating these differences, cultivating them, and making the best out of them also, but anticipating them, managing the expectations is one of the challenges and beauties as well of this working in such a multicultural environment. And it's making the effort. I think what DEI is all about, or should be all about, at least in my belief, is not changing people and making them uniform. From my standpoint, it would be boring, but at least understanding the differences and trying to reach out to the other and trying to find a way of making the best and taking the best out of each cultures and putting up with certain things which are inherent to other cultures and accepting them.
Indeed. I mean, you made some really good points. I guess in general, throughout this conversation, the point around generalizations, I think it's going to be something that will be somewhat unavoidable, but I think we recognize that, and we're all talking from our sort of personal perspectives. So that's just a note for the audience. And anticipating some of what those differences are, whether they're kind of stereotypes or caricatures, in most cases is based on some element of truth, and so anticipating that can really help us in our interactions with our colleagues across the region. So, Liisa, I guess kind of you've written about growing up in a remote town in Finland and have since gone on to study and work in multiple countries. How has that shaped your perspectives on DEI? What have you observed as you've kind of moved around?
Yeah, it's a great question, and probably one of the most common questions I get
living in London is how come you can love the city life so much, having grown up in the absolute middle of nowhere. And for me personally, I think I've got so much sort of pent up energy for adventure, not traveled so much in my youth. So that's where it all comes from. I'm extremely grateful to have been born in Finland. I'm extremely grateful for the education that I had access to, fully government funded education that then took me to the world to study sort of all across Europe and beyond. Similarly, having been able to have a career in HR and DEI across the Nordics and then also further Europe and outside of it has been very sort of eye-opening. I like that David already mentioned stereotypes. Oftentimes, people can see Finland and the Nordics as this utopia for equality. And in relative terms, of course, that's exactly the truth. And my example of accessing that education goes to show it. However, the sort of equality of access and equality of outcomes is something that I really learned in the Nordic countries. For example, for women, Finland is actually one of the more dangerous countries in the EU for women. Around 18% of women only feel that they have a sort of equality when it comes to gender in society. And so similarly, when you look at languages, so for example, if you don't speak Finnish, you might get access to the same brilliant education that I did. But then when you start applying for jobs in Finland, the fact that you don't speak Finnish or Swedish might be a huge barrier for your career. And so that's sort of what working in the Nordics made very clear to me. I then moved to the US. And obviously there, I was extremely inspired by the energy around DEI at the time. So this is many years ago already. So for example, they celebrated International Women's Month and you could attend events every single day. And I was extremely inspired by that. But yet, as you can imagine, that sort of visibility did not always reflect everyone's lived experience. Coming to the UK then, I've been blown away by the current sort of policy agenda and how we've got to influence things like the draft equality bill was the latest one, where we get to influence the proposals around having mandatory ethnicity and disability pay gap reporting. I mean, this is incredibly progressive and it's been fascinating to see how policy change can be a sort of lever for inclusion. So there's lots I've learned from all around. But looking at it from a European perspective, I'm really lucky that we get to work together with Insurance Europe. So I get to learn from all the different countries and their insurance associations as well. And there I've really seen power in collaboration. I think that's what Europe does best, sort of learning from each other. Each country has very much its own level of maturity when it comes to DEI, but there's a lot we can learn from each other as well. So I guess what I've learned in a nutshell is that sort of you have to embrace the nuance and the complexity of it. And ultimately, it's about sort of realizing that there's not a one size fits all approach. Going back to your second slide or question as well, I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, indeed. And, you reiterate some of what David was saying about kind of, embracing that and making sure it's beneficial to your career. Georgie, we'll come to you if we may. And I know you've always been passionate about kind of equity, inclusion, and of course, an organization like Eurostar operating in the countries that you do. How do you personally, and how does an organization like Eurostar navigate those sort of different working styles? And as David and Liisa were both talking about embracing it, how do you do that at an organization like Eurostar?
Thank you, Yusouf, and good afternoon, everyone, as well. It's a really great conversation so far, and actually I'm learning a lot, even from the first two answers. But I would probably echo quite a lot of what both David and Liisa have said. But I think at Eurostar, it's all about kind of navigating different working styles and cultures from a perspective of kind of balance and respect. So obviously we understand that cultural norms can shape individual perspectives, and we try to be, let me say, open about that and curious about different opinions. But also, a lot of it is based on stereotypes, which is risky to fall back on. And there's something around keeping a bit of a sense of humor about that. So I had someone tell me the other day, whenever we speak, I know to reserve the first 5 minutes to talk about the weather. And it's just, little humorous things that play on what's normal in each country. But as I say, I think it is quite dangerous sometimes to rely solely on stereotypes, but I'm about to do just that when I say that, Belgian colleagues in general tend to be quite analytical, quite details orientated. As David was saying, our French teams really like to think about all these different perspectives and react in the moment and have discussions. And Brits, probably maybe similar to your German colleagues, David, tend to be quite pragmatic, and they come to meetings really prepared, and maybe that gives a sense that the decision's already been made sometimes. But honestly, I think you need a bit of all of those different strengths and approaches for the business to run well. But ultimately, we're kind of speaking to individuals, right? Not national stereotypes. And we have to sort of accept that there's no one single right way to see the world. I think go back to that word respect. It comes down to treating each other with respect and being open to different opinions, different ways of seeing things. So, for example, at the moment, we're in the process of designing training to help develop our emotional intelligence skills and to navigate some of those difficult conversations. And it's been a real labor of love, really, bringing people around the business together and hearing all of those different perspectives so that we can make something that really, really works for our people and our context.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important to just reiterate what you're saying around, we're all kind of working with individuals. So as much as those kind of stereotypes or whatever you might have in the back of your mind, you just have to remember that, find out about who you're working with, find out what works for them, what works for those teams. It's not going to be a one size fits all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you had any kind of initiatives that you've rolled out at Eurostar where you've really had to consider these sort of cultural differences? And does that change how you adapt and how you can implement those?
Do you know what? It was actually probably one of the first things I encountered, and I really wanted to think more about because I found it quite a key part of writing the strategy. So we wanted this, let's say, North Star in our vision and mission, and that needed to resonate around the business, because actually, exactly as David was saying about that sense of this being an Anglo-Saxon approach, which is being imposed, I personally really felt that because I'm a Brit. I was trying to bring what has maybe a bit of a longer history in the UK and work with different cultures to, as I say, build something which works. But what I found was really, really important was that North Star needs to be something that people can understand and can buy into, because yes, we're all European, but we are actually quite different cultures, even within the very small Western European bloc that we sit in Eurostar. And I'd be tempted to say that in the UK, we're sort of at one end of the scale. So we've got a little bit of a level of individualism. So people want to share their personal background. They want to talk openly about their ethnicity, their religion. At the other end of the scale, we've got France, who have this very strong concept of liberté, égalité, fraternité, so liberty, equality and fraternity. And I feel that there's a much stronger emphasis on that sense of community and perhaps sort of national identity being more important than other aspects of you as an individual. And then we have, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany sort of sitting somewhere in between. It's a very long way around of saying that the first few months I spent here, a lot of my time was visiting all of the different sites and speaking to people from different roles and locations and nationalities, not only to understand what was happening internally, but also to understand what DEI meant to them. And I found out it meant different things in different places and to different people. So we came up with this key principle, which forms part of our mission statement. And we use that to apply to all of our work, which is that we celebrate our differences, but what we have in common as well. And I think especially at the moment, there's a lot of turbulence outside of our four walls. And I think it's been really helpful to keep reminding ourselves and keep coming back to that principle that there's a lot more that unites us than that pulls us apart. And I think having that continental European lens has actually really helped us center that approach.
I think that's really useful, and Actually, I'd echo a lot of what you say here at Clyde & Co. I mean, if we just try and roll out everything from London or from the UK, then we're going to find quite quickly that actually, some of our colleagues in other regions are starting at different points, and so we can't just assume that kind of everyone is fully on board and ready to go with whatever we try and propose. Lionel, just bringing you in. I mean, firstly, as a renowned academic in this space, could you just tell us about, what drove you to kind of studying and researching D&I and why you're so passionate about it?
Yeah, thank you so much, Yusouf, for the invitation. Hello, everyone. Where I was going to this field is first more for a theoretical viewpoint. There are many, at least in management, the management literature, there are many studies about DEI, but more with using a psychology lens, psychology theory. And I'm more a sociologist, organization scholar. So I wanted to bring this lens, this theoretical lens, more at the macro level, using sociological theory to study the same phenomenon, but focusing again much more on the organization, the organizational processes. As I say, I'm more a structuralist, so and focus on the system and not the people. If you want to fix the system, fix the system, not the people. The second point is also the willingness to broaden the scope. So there are many studies about gender diversity, racial diversity, and don't get me wrong, that's very important, of course, but much less studies about disability, neurodiversity, ageism today. And also, I'm not surprised by the third question of the poll is to bring socioeconomic status. And that's one of my mainstream of research as a key dimension of diversity, and also as a way to bring everyone on board and to build commonalities, to bring people together beyond gender, ethnicity, or your different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And finally, just also to have more, if possible, to have an impact and a positive impact, to be as useful as possible, because my research is very linked with my teaching, which was not the case with my previous stream of research that was much more theoretical.
That's very inspiring, and I know that your research and your studies have been used by many organizations in trying to set their own DEI strategies. On the flip side of what kind of Georgie was describing, in your research, again, you will have come across, I imagine, unintended consequences of, for want of a better description, ill-defined practices or ill-defined initiatives. Can you tell us about any of those?
Yeah, so I mean, we have many studies for a long time now about what works, what doesn't work. There is a new avenues of research about unintended consequences of your DEI initiative, that you have good intent, good resources, and you didn't end up with the expected results. And so based on the academic literature, you can have like potentially 4 unintended consequences to backfire. You have a diversity goal, diversity target, and you get a negative results. A negative spillover effect, I will mention that with one of my studies, that you have a target, like I want to increase gender diversity in this business unit, and you have a negative result on a different outcome, but diversity rated or not, about your level of innovation or your culture, or you had a target about gender diversity and you undermine the racial diversity, for example. You also can have a positive spillover effect, and we need to mention the positive aspect, that you affect in a positive way an outcome that was not the primary intention. So there are many studies that, if you increase the diversity of your team, you will have a higher level of innovation, better creativity, flexibility in the decision-making process. So again, that was not your primary intent, but you got positive outcome, positive effect. And the last one is false progress. You have, again, a diversity goal progress, and apparently you met this goal, but actually you don't change anything and you don't really improve things at the diversity level. The classical example is the tokenism effect, that you play the number game. If you look at the publicly listed companies in the US, there is this magic number of 2 female board members. It became the norm, and that's more tokenism. It's much difficult to go from 2 to 3 than 0 to 2. It became the social norm, and you don't really change how the board work and the decisions, but just you play the number games. And briefly to speak about my specific latest paper is about the US corporate legal services sector. So we looked at the 200 US largest law firms. And what we found is that they increased the number of female partners in response to their clients' increase of their female executives, and also the potential clients, the clients of their rivals that they want to poach. And for them, for those law firms, it's a way to send a signal to their clients to retain them, and to potential clients to attract them, that they share the same pro-diversity issue. So it can be part of their competitive advantage. It's not a causal mechanism, it's more a correlational story. But also on the downside, what is interesting is that as long as they increase the number of female partners, inadvertently, they decrease the number of ethnic minority background partner. Okay. Because again, they put too much time, effort, and resources on gender, and instead of having a comprehensive DI strategies targeting many dimensions, they forgot one dimension. So you had this substitution effect, this competing effect sometimes between different dimensions of EDI.
That's so interesting, and there's so many things that we could follow up on. But I guess the part of the message there is to people who are doing kind of DEI roles and within organizations, it's incredibly important to make sure you analyze and assess how your kind of initiatives have performed, and whether that's whether they've moved numbers in one place but have had a detrimental impact somewhere else. And actually the numbers game that you talked about, I think it's very difficult to talk about diversity in Europe without touching on data and data collection. We often hear about what gets measured gets done, and a lot of the DEI strategies that we'll have seen have data as a primary part of that. We know for many reasons, including historical legacies, that data collection in Europe just lands differently. So what's your experience of that? And for the likes of myself and Georgie and other DEI leads, what kind of advice do you give to people trying to gather data in Europe?
So when we say that you can't succeed in your DI strategy without data, I fully agree. That's my bias. I'm a quantitative researcher. I'm not going to touch on the legal aspect. Maybe David can do that later and much better than me. But more, again, our organizational perspective, when I work with companies, I try to convey the message that collecting data, it should be the last stage of your data collection, but also the first stage of your data management. So let me explain. And still today, too often I see companies that they come to me, they come to us to design a survey and to have the right question, the right measure, the right metrics, and they send out the survey out of the blue, and they have a very low rate of response. And I always say, that again, sending a survey and collecting the data, it's the last stage of your process. You should set up the stage first by focus group, 1-to-1, 1-to-3, to expose and to explain your intention, that you are working on this, to get the feedback of people, because you ask sometimes very personal questions, your sexual orientation, your educational background, your socioeconomic status. So of course, people, they are not going to respond from a survey out of nowhere, So have this focus group first, improve the survey, the questions, the different dimensions, by getting the feedback, by including the feedback of your employees. Experiment also, that's a very, very important stage that, try if you can to your survey or your mode of data collection with us at a small scale, with just one team at different location, different business unit, to see the feedback and if it works. And only after all these stages, you can send a survey out. So that's really, again, collecting data is really at least the survey is the last stage of your data collection. But then it's the first step of your data management, that once you have the data, what do you do? And again, it's just the starting point, First, you should present those data in a very simple way, salient and comparable way, to make comparison across units, across time periods, across geographical location if you operate worldwide. Be transparent, communicate as much as you can the data, even if they don't look good. People, they are always sometimes afraid of this, but if you have confidentiality, internal document, share the data. If you ask me to fill your survey, I expect something in return. You can't leave me in the black. That's very important to get the buy-in of people. So communicate, leverage those diversity data to empower the right people to act. Again, I've seen too many times companies that they keep those DEI data for the HR department, for the DEI manager, and the daily manager on the different business units, they haven't been communicated those numbers, so they don't know even the landscape and the diagnosis of their organization. Make also an effort about the narrative that, make clearly the connection between the daily decision of your managers, of your leaders, and the resulting diversity outcomes. So sometimes it's people perceive a gap between my role on a daily basis and your diversity outcomes or diversity goals. And your role as a diversity champion, HR person, diversity manager is to create this connection. That, the way you interview your people in your business unit, in your small department, in your small foreign office, that will impact X, that will impact Y, that will impact our diversity outcome. So it's very important to create this causal chain. Set diversity goals also. Sorry, Yusouf.
No, good. I was just going to say that's incredibly kind of useful advice, particularly. I don't think I've come across too many places where there's really been a concerted effort before the survey goes out to really be considered about the questions, who they're going to, how they're phrased, and then, as you say, just making sure that the outcome of that survey is linked, is very clear, is very transparent. Who's going to see it, what people are going to do with that data.
So the keyword is communication, before sending the survey, even after, to share those results, to get the buy-in of people. And last point is to also to set up the social norms, that, you will communicate on what exists in the company, the descriptive norms, and what many people are already doing. It can be turned into a prescriptive norms that will become the habits, routines, and even the culture of your company.
Indeed. And David, Lionel sort of touched on the legal aspect, and you're the expert here on this call, so I'm sure you can help explain this to us. But I know your team has been doing some work around data protection regulations in France, which I think a lot of people will find certainly interesting, but maybe quite surprising. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Sure. And picking up on what Georgie was saying a bit earlier, there's this approach in France of égalité, liberté, égalité, fraternité, and the notion of égalité means that in the mythology of how France has seen itself for a long time, there's only one country, only one people. And for this reason, it's been the received wisdom that you can't do, can't have or can't collect data or do some have detailed statistics on based on ethnic origins and measuring diversity on that front, for example, some other type of sensitive data. But this one has always been a sensitive topic. And to be fair, also in the public debate, very often the call for making that sort of data or statistics was a call coming from people who didn't necessarily have good intentions in that respect. But the reality is that organizations who want to do something about the AI and want to make sure that they don't lose track of their DEI objective on the ethnic diversity in their organizations, have felt for a long time that this was something on which you cannot do or cannot collect data, or this is a minefield or with a lot of pitfalls. And indeed, there are restrictions because precisely there is this general notion of it's only one country, and also some people with not necessarily well-meaning intentions can use this data against ethnic minorities. And what we've done with and is done some work with an NGO and the French data protection agency, the CNIL, to set up a process to collect data within organizations, ethnic origins, ethnic origins, sexual orientations, etc. All types of data, but in a way which is compliant with the norms of GDPR and also the expectations of the French data protection agency, the CNIL. The idea is to have tools which are legally compliant and helping organizations measure and collect the data on these topics, which for a long time in France have been deemed to be a minefield because people will be exposing or breaching the law. So we have finding ways, and it's so important, especially at a stage now where AI is going to take more space, more importance in the way businesses are managed. It's even more vital. It's always been vital to measure DEI performance and achievement of DEI objectives, but it's going to be even more vital to do so in a space where AI-driven decisions will be taken at all stages and could have massive impacts, long-term, unexpected and unintended massive impacts. It's even more important to have this type of tools. So this is what we're working on, and I think now we've come to a landing again with the help of the French Data Protection Agency. Whether that can translate into other states, I don't know, but I think it's a good experience. And of course, the French Data Protection Agency has been very active in ensuring, or one of the most active agencies in ensuring compliance with GDPR. So I think there may be lessons also to be learned or things to be exported in other member states, but there's some progress can be made on that front.
Yeah, indeed, I guess it's a case of challenging what is a pretty common myth and actually really exploring how we can get that data if it is that important to all of us, and how we can get it in a way that is sensitive, appropriate, and as you say, if it's done in the right way with the right intentions, then challenging just how we can do that. We'll stay with you, David, and just shift directions a little bit. We said we're delivering this session in English, and while English can connect us, it does raise some important questions about linguistic privilege, access, and whose voices are most easily heard. It should be an important part of the diversity, the DEI conversation. So what's your take on that? English is a sort of global default, and how do you and your teams kind of work together, and what languages do you use?
Well, it's an interesting question, especially for me personally, because I grew up in France and French, and I'm passionate about English and English culture and British culture generally. And I've tried through my studies and work, try as much as I can, erase as much French accent as possible when I speak English. And picking up again on a point Georgie made earlier, I found that, in fact, with the humor and the stereotypes, I sometimes find to break the ice with an audience, it's good to make a joke on my own country, on my own culture, and I take a French accent starting a speech, and it always works well, especially in certain audiences, and I think it does work well. I think the topic of language obviously is from my perception, the fact that we all speak English, I think it's very convenient now. The level of English everywhere in Europe is massively improved, even in French cafes. And I think it's a very useful tool. But I've surprised myself thinking, well, for me, I'm speaking foreign language. and thinking when I travel in Europe, in other countries, thinking, well, I'm polite because I don't speak French and I speak English to them. Well, in fact, and just realizing once I was jumping in a taxi in Milan and speaking straight away, realizing I couldn't say a word, or maybe, well, I could say a few words, but not the right ones, to the taxi drivers asking for my direction and even telling, sorry, I don't speak Italian. And I felt really bad. And I think there's probably a bit of progress. So there's been some progress in the learning of English everywhere in Europe. But I find that's the first point I want to make. Perhaps, reminding ourselves that we should make an effort out of respect for this cultural diversity in Europe to always make the effort to at least speak more and make an effort more speaking the language in the other countries. And the other thing I find, it's not a very concern, I mean, compared to the other concerns we've talked about in DEI, it's not necessarily an area where there is a priority, but I find that English, it's funny because I find sometimes we understand each other better, Spanish-speaking English and Italian-speaking English and the French-speaking English will understand each other better than when you talk to British people and look at you. And so we understand each other much better, sometimes because there are some common roots. And sometimes I think there is a bit, I find, because people speaking the foreign language and the level of English is not necessarily as good, it doesn't reflect well on the quality of the work they provide or the quality of the advice. And you sort of get a bias on, that person is speaking not very good English, and sort of generalize and think, well, they're not good lawyers, talking about my field. When in fact, no, it's just that they're struggling with the English. And so, yeah, it's something to be mindful of, I think, for efficient work. But again, if we only had that sort of issue on the DI front, I think it would be good news. But it's still something to pay attention to.
Yeah, I get exactly what you mean. I mean, even language bias, even accent bias, of the same language is something that comes up. But and I guess Georgie, when I'm on the Eurostar, you can hear announcements in different languages depending on where you are. But what's it like, kind of behind the scenes? Is the kind of working language English? What other perspectives do you have about the linguistic diversity?
It's a great question, and I'm smiling at a lot of what David was saying because it is really resonating. But we do have a lot of linguistic diversity across the business. So we've got actually, I think, nearly 50 different nationalities. So we have a vast array of connected languages, and I think I hesitate to say that the working language is English because actually a lot depends on the role itself. So in our stations, for example, everyone speaks at least French and English. A lot of them will also speak an additional language. So I know we've got, even just in the St Pancras station in London, we have Swedish speakers, Japanese speakers. And that's really helpful, obviously, for communicating with customers who've maybe travelled a bit further afield. And there's also a real safety aspect to a lot of it. So as part of their training, our trained drivers and our managers need to be able to speak to a pretty high standard all of the languages of the countries that they're traveling through. They need to be able to communicate freely with signallers and controllers on each of the national railways. So it's not that we, in particular the more operational roles, I wouldn't say that there's a strong bias towards any language. It's what fits the situation. In the back office support roles, I would say we tend to flex dependent on who's in the meeting. But when we get to the point of sort of central communications going out from the business, we're really, really careful to use each of our three main languages, which are Flemish, French and English. So if I think about some of the stuff we've done in the DEI team, we recently have been running a campaign called Everyone Belongs, which is all about building this safe and inclusive culture. So we've had posters and screens and emails whizzing all around the business, and they are in each of our three main languages. And, it takes a bit longer to get to that point, but I think it's really important to make sure that everyone actually feels seen and valued, and to show respect actually to people by using a language that they can connect with. And actually very recently as well, this is going outside of spoken language, but we've got International Sign Language Day coming up next week. And so we've been giving our colleagues the opportunity to attend sessions to learn some really simple sign language in each of their countries as well. And I think when I see that, I really understand the love that Eurostar colleagues have for different languages, and it's actually very strong desire, I think, to connect with each other. It feels very embedded in a very deep part of our culture. And I will just add one personal reflection as well on what David was saying about that assumed level of competence when you're speaking a different language. So I used to work overseas and I was always speaking another language, and I felt sometimes people thought I didn't know what I was talking about, and it was actually my personality was a bit different. I was a bit quieter, and that additional effort, and it really made me value and appreciate the effort that people put into when they need to use a second or a third language all the time. So it's a really nice point, David.
Yeah, I can see from some of the questions that we've been getting on Slido that kind of language topic is clearly one of interest. Somehow we've already gotten to 51 minutes in, so we'll maybe go to the sort of final couple of questions, and we'll look to the future a little bit. So, Lionel, I guess firstly to you, and it feels more important now than ever, and I think you started touching on it earlier, but how do we build commonalities and common ground from a DEI perspective, kind of around Europe and indeed outside too?
So yeah, given the current context, that's very, very important. It was always important because it was there already, I think, for a long time. What I try to advise to managers is, I'm a bit agnostic about which framing you should choose for your DI strategy, but you need to choose a clear framing. It could be, for example, the business case of diversity. It could work very well in very competitive companies, very competitive environment. It could be a disaster in other organizations because that's not the culture. You will be perceived as very cynical, and using your employees or moral values for your bottom line. So again, choose what stick and what fits with your culture. That's very important. But think clearly and think carefully about the framing, again, to get the engagement and the buy-in of people. That's very important. So it can be the business case, it can be the moral case, the equal opportunities. Today I try to push the framing about fairness. It's because people, when they don't know EDI, they always think about positive discrimination and quotas. It's just about fairness and being objectively assessed. So that's why it goes hand in hand with meritocracy, for example. Anyway, you should promote equal opportunities for all individuals, but at the same time to acknowledge cultural differences. So, it's a mix between assimilation and differentiation, the integration paradigm that you promote equal outcomes, equal opportunities for everybody, but you do acknowledge the differences. You're not gender blind, you're not color blind, and that's absolutely fine. Last point I want to make is also, it might be, I'm trying to be more optimistic here, is might be also a way to renew our traditional EDI approach. And because what do we do in EDI space? We categorize people based on gender, on ethnicity, on religion, and so on and so forth. So of course, creating those groups, you can create conflicts or distance at least, because we are not part of the same group. So what could be different ways to group people and to frame your initiative? It could be a need-based initiative and not a gender-based initiative. So, a classical example that I take is the family support initiatives, family policies. They shouldn't be gender-based. They should be, what's the need? That you are a new parent or a new carer, you need some time off. I don't mind about your gender, it doesn't matter. That's how really you will change the society, because if your parental policies are gender-based, you're just reproducing the inequalities that you're a female employees, you're going to take some time off to take care of the baby. You're the male employees, you're the breadwinner. And you keep this division of labor and reproducing inequalities. So, what could be the default criterion to define your initiatives? Even if the overlap of people affected are almost the same, the narrative will be very different to have a gender-based initiative than need-based initiative. And the last point to follow up on the beginning of the presentation, the socioeconomic status. I always try to push companies to bring social classes and socioeconomic status in their EDI strategy, in their corporate diversity programs, because it helps them to avoid backlash against their initiative and diversity programs. For example, to characterize men or white men as universally privileged. Again, true or not, statistically it's true, but true or not, you create a negative perception and lack of engagement of people. And by building common grounds like this, built on socioeconomic status, by bringing this into your EDI strategy, people can share and experiment common problems, common issues, even with different backgrounds, beyond the traditional criteria to categorize people. So again, think about the narrative, very important, and the criterion to group peoples. That's as important as your data strategy and your goals.
Absolutely. And then back to what you were saying earlier about sort of unintended consequences, we certainly don't want to implement something that will actually alienate another group. And one thing you talked about around kind of meritocracy, that's certainly a theme that's been running through a lot of the sessions in this year's Dive-In Festival is around, this is not kind of diluting the waters or the quality in any way. This is about equity and making sure that the right people have the right opportunity. So the talent can progress everywhere. It's not about quotas or just promoting people for the sake of it. Liisa, one final one for you then. For both, for audience both within and out of Europe, what are your tips and your key takeaways on how to work in an inclusive way?
Yeah, I would, and it almost summarizes the entire panel discussion. I think my top tip is to avoid assumptions. Europe is a beautifully diverse region, as has come clear from this discussion as well. And so if your attempt is to be an inclusive colleague or an inclusive leader, that's what I try and avoid. Hopefully sort of my examples that I shared from Finland go to show that as well, is that oftentimes sort of if you make assumptions about a single person's lived experience, might not come to the best solution. So instead, I would try to encourage people to practice listening to hear and listening to understand rather than always listening to respond. So Georgie's example about asking people, what does DEI mean to you is a really good one. Oftentimes when people sort of challenge my story and the statistics I share from Finland, and whilst debate sometimes, it can be healthy and can be a good thing, but if it's about a person's lived experience, I would avoid it. Our feelings of inclusion, they're shaped by psychological, structural, and behavioral factors. Lionel's probably not nodding because I'm missing out on the sociology point here. But as an individual, you may not be able to influence how I psychologically find a situation and how included I feel due to past experiences that I've had. But what you can influence is the way that you show me respect and how you're respectfully curious towards sort of my experience and my background. So that's what I would encourage people to do.
Respect and respectful curiosity. I think that's an amazing way to kind of to finish. We haven't had too much time for questions, but actually we've answered some of the audience questions through the conversation, and any that we've missed we'll try and get to. That just leaves me to say a huge merci to David and Lionel, kiitos to Liisa, and of course thank you, Georgie, for such an enlightening session. I should say that myself and all of our speakers are very happy to connect on LinkedIn to continue the conversation. So please do. Thank you all for attending today. As a reminder, this is CPD accredited, and we're reminded of the objectives on the screen at the moment. I know we probably could have spoken for a few more hours, but hopefully that's kind of just opened the door and scratched the surface for you all to go and have further conversations in your organizations about diversity, and particularly in our case, diversity around Europe. So Thank you again for listening and enjoy the rest of the dive-in sessions.